Welcome to Something Positive for Positive People. I'm Courtney Brain. Something Positive for Positive People is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that connects people who are navigating STI stigma to mental health resources. My name is Courtney. Oh, wait, I already said that. I should be introducing you, Malia, like Maria, but with an L.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So, you also completed the Something Positive for Positive People group therapy, the first one ever. Hopefully, we get a lot more to come. But
yeah.
You, along with everyone else, y'all set the stage for this. Y'all set the foundation for what the expectations are, how the foundation is going to be moving forward. So tell me a little bit about your experience.
I mean, I'm honored to be part of the kind of kickoff season of this. You know, it was kind of a godsend for me. My experience was, everyone kind of comes from different walks of life and are at different phases and stages in their diagnosis and healing. And I think that was nice to have that aspect of like getting people's, different takes on things and, just to have it led by a therapist and kind of delving into some of these topics that you would delve in therapy is just pretty priceless to me. I've kind of opened the floodgates for me as far as therapy goes. But it was a really great experience. I mean, everyone was so cool, and we just I miss them,
Yeah.
Miss seeing their faces every week. So
when you say open the floodgates to therapy for you, what do you mean?
I mean that it has opened my eyes to a lot of things and areas, shown some light on some areas that I need to continue to work on. And I think I shared with you kind of before I got started on this that therapy was just kind of a luxury that I couldn't really afford. It didn't seem accessible to me. I mean, it's not to a lot of people, but I, as a single mom, like the needs of my kids have always come first, and trying to make it work on one income, there's just not a lot of extra resources for things like that, unfortunately. I mean, I definitely should have a long time ago invested in myself in this way, but, just life happens and I couldn't. So, I don't know if it's just kind of like the stars aligning and this kind of being in conjunction with where I'm at in my own journey. That's probably part of it, but also just, like I said, it really shone some light and kind of opened my eyes to some things. We talked about things like boundaries and, things like that just, again, it really shone the light on areas that I have to improve upon.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that about therapy being essentially it's a luxury. And I don't think that anyone's healing process should be considered a luxury, considering how pricey therapy is. I had someone who, she was in Kentucky, and I asked about rates because I was going to want to utilize her in Kentucky. She said she charges $170 per session, and I'm like, who can afford that?
Right, because to get the most out of it, you need to be going like every week, ideally in the beginning, and I mean, who can afford that? And I mean, and any resources that I would have had to afford that, I've had to put towards my kids' mental health,
Yeah, and it shouldn't be a choice. You shouldn't have to choose like this or that. Not to say, like, obviously food, air, water, shelter, safety.
Yeah,
these are the top needs that we have, connection.
Yeah.
But that self-exploration that makes us the best, most stable, and aware person that we can be for those around us, that is absolutely necessary so that we don't project that onto other people, especially you as a single mom. How many children do you have?
Yeah. I have two. My oldest is 19 and just moved out.
Congrats.
Well, thank you. I mean, it was kind of it needed to happen kind of thing. And then I have another son who is 13.
Oh,
so
okay.
pray for me. Two teenagers,
Yeah. So this actually may have been like something that, well, it was group therapy. So I imagine you didn't really get to talk about your kids or any of the personal stuff that you were navigating with them, right?
Right. Not a ton. I mean, it did there were times that we kind of just were able to share, and there were some days that the topic was like stress and how you cope, and I definitely was able to share a little bit about being a single mom, and there's just not time for me to deal with my own feelings, let alone process them and work through them. You're kind of just going and doing the things that need to be done, and then the day's over and you get up and you do it all over again.
Mm-hmm. So you were able to make all of the sessions, or did you miss any at all?
I had to miss one. I forget why. It was some kind of, double booking or kids hockey, something like that. Yeah.
Well, I really do appreciate that despite what you have going on, like raising a family, especially as the head of household, like I watch my mom do it. And I know that it is not an easy thing to do. And so for you to have been able to make this time for yourself I cannot believe you didn't tell me I had this pick in my head the whole time.
I wasn't judging. I wasn't judging at all. I was, you do you.
For you to have been able to make the time and anchor this into your weekly routine, it really speaks volumes to me about the importance of having some sort of an anchor or structural fixed activity in your life that grounds you, anchors you, that no one can take you away from, that is yours. Yeah. And when I say no one can take you from, I mean obviously like there's emergencies that come up, but
yeah. Well, and that my kids are old enough to where I can be like, y'all, I got a phone call, don't bug me.
Yeah.
Unless someone is, losing life or limb. But generally they can take care of themselves. Obviously, if my kids were younger, it's harder to carve out that time. But, I think I kind of mentioned kind of where I'm at in my journey. And I think kind of for the first time in my life, because I was a young mom, like I'm making myself the priority. So that was important, just like the principle of it,
Yeah. How old are you?
I am 39.
Okay.
Be 40 this year.
All right. Coming up, 40s and 30, right? Especially with COVID. Actually, it should be the new 25.
Yeah, I hear that, but then you look in the mirror and you're like,
oh, you getting ready to have a hot girl summer or what?
Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. I'm pretty busy. So, but, part of this journey for me was kind of gearing myself up to be able to be at a place to put myself out there and pursue, trying to find a relationship. I've been single a long time, and, it's something I really desire. It's a piece of my life that I would like to explore, and that requires me putting myself out there, and that requires me being the best version of myself, or at least a healthy version of myself, where I can recognize my patterns and have the confidence that it takes to get out there and, put all my stuff on the table, so to speak.
Yeah. And I'm so very appreciative of you for not only, connecting. I honestly don't remember how a lot of people ended up connecting and reaching out. But if I do remember correctly, no, there's no need to even go into that actually. You showed up, and that really means a lot to me because a lot of people don't show up when they have to, like, when it's free. If something's being paid for them, they don't value it. I can't tell you how many people have just like stopped showing up to therapy. I can't get a hold of them. The therapist doesn't know what's going on. He's like, we scheduled an appointment, but no show. So to have had, unfortunately, like I have to say this, but I more so appreciate you for just being able to make it. And I'm glad that this was something that meant so much to you, at least to the point of you being able to show up and do this for yourself.
Yeah, it really did mean a lot to me. I mean, I was not going to miss an opportunity for some affordable guidance and, support through this, for sure. It blows my mind that people do that. I mean, I guess maybe it doesn't because people are just, they be that way sometimes.
And what I realize, like, a lot of people just kind of like, they think they need something and then they kind of settle for something else. By the time, like, if I have a conversation with someone, that means they've been looking for the resources that are here. They're looking for something that something positive for positive people provides. Otherwise, they wouldn't have found it, right? So
Yeah.
here, in my opinion, therapy is like the pinnacle of um, outreach for support, because support groups are all over the place. You can find them anywhere. You can find dating groups. You can find dating. You can find so many different things in relation to your diagnosis. But when you're really ready to explore this, when you're really ready to heal and look at the stuff that not only herpes brings to the surface, but everything that brought herpes to the surface on an emotional level and on a mental level, that can be intimidating. That is probably, like I said, the peak of what your healing is going to look like, to my knowledge, because I haven't seen anything else that's been more effective. I haven't seen someone come out and be like, I have herpes and I'm still dating, and then that person like be healed or going through their healing process. It's more of
like they're just totally okay. It hasn't phased them.
Yeah. And
yeah.
so,
no, you're totally right. I mean, and it's the willingness to be able to take a look at that too, and that's not an easy thing to do, and it's not something that a lot of people are really willing to do. It's the mostly bad and ugly parts that you have to kind of take a look at, and like I said earlier, I think the stars kind of align, because that's definitely where I'm at.
Yeah.
Personally, herpes kind of played a role in that, in a sense, because I had an experience that was just like, oh, okay, we need to really get to the bottom of what's going on here, you know? And it just kind of, I stumbled upon your post or whatever and reached out, and here we are. And I'm so thankful that it worked out this way.
I am too. So while we're on the topic, you mentioned your journey, your story a few times. Are you open to sharing that with me?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, where do you want to start? Because I feel like
let's start
how
with
much time you got.
Your diagnosis. What were you diagnosed with? How long ago? And what was finding out like for you?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with HSV-1 about 8 years ago. Actually, I had some Facebook posts pop up that I was like, oh, yep, that was right when that happened, and it was me at my kid's 5th grade graduation, and I was putting on a brave face, wasn't showing how devastated I was, I think I had probably had it for a couple of years and just didn't know. I never had any symptoms, but I had an outbreak that caused me to go to the doctor. I was seeing someone at the time. They did not react very well. They got tested themselves. They were negative, so I must have had it for a couple of years. I had no idea that could happen, so I don't fully know where I got it, but it's okay. It doesn't, it's not a crucial piece to the puzzle, so to speak.
What made you get tested?
So I had an outbreak. I was having something going on, and I was not sure what was happening. I kind of naively, we had just been to this reservoir that's kind of gross, and I was like, man, do I have some kind of infection? Like, what's happening? And it turns out, like, I got swabbed, and it was positive for HSV-1. And I know you've been posting a lot about like the medical professionals and how they respond. And I do have to say, like, it was not a negative experience for me. I have worked in the medical field for a long time, and I actually knew the people that I was going to see as a doctor. So I already kind of had a rapport, and she was fairly kind about it. I mean, not that there's a lot of resources, but she was pretty kind about it and kind of explained how it can happen and how common it is and things of that nature. So.
Okay, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Because I don't want anyone to think that I'm shitting on the medical field or the providers. It's more of just like a system thing. The way that providers are taught, to talk about sex or not talk about sex. And the way that people are taught to talk about sex. Like, there's this huge disconnect when a patient and provider are sitting across from one another and herpes is on the table. So how one receives, how one delivers that information. I use this analogy of like looking down on the floor, two people standing across from each other, and there's a 6 from one person's perspective. On the other side, they're looking at a 9. So we've got to kind of communicate and work together to switch perspectives and see, oh, this is a 6 or it's a 9, or it's just like a sideways 6 and a 9, right?
Right.
But until like there has to be some sort of a middle piece there. And I believe that the shared experiences of people in the right spaces are what's gonna be able to put that six in sort of like a rotation or something, or encourage people to converse with one another about this so that we can get on the same page and have consistent, trustworthy information when it comes to not just herpes and herpes stigma, but also with the resources that follow and the experiences to expect with it. Because people, when they're diagnosed, they don't know what to expect next. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I know. It devastates people. It blindsides them. I mean, it's, you know, I just had a friend reach out to me recently that was like, so I know I haven't talked to you in a while, but you shared a while ago about your diagnosis. I just got diagnosed. Like, need someone to talk to, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's just, you, like you said, those shared experiences. I mean, it helps you realize how common it is. And yeah, it definitely would be nice if the medical field was kind of hip to that game.
Mm-hmm. Out of curiosity, how would you feel if that group therapy session was more so for people who've experienced a sexual trauma rather than exclusively a herpes diagnosis?
Well, I can't relate hugely in the sexual trauma area. I think most women have had some dabbling in that, but gosh, I think sexual trauma is probably such a specific thing, you know, that they probably need a whole lot more help and work through, and it might be a more personal thing too. But there is camaraderie in having shared experiences. I know that through a lot of other hardships I've gone through in life. I mean, support groups have been so clutch. You know, and maybe even like newly diagnosed people, you know, not that people that have been diagnosed for a long time can't struggle with it, but it definitely is. Man, if we could have had that information when we first were diagnosed and kind of set that precedence and been on the path of thinking about it in a positive way as opposed to having it just be this negative black cloud, you know?
Yeah. So when I say sexual trauma, I don't mean in the extreme of having experienced sexual assault. People that I've interviewed from the group therapy session have had an assault happen to some extent. It was recently brought into my perspective, and by recently I mean over the last year, that an STI diagnosis is a sexual trauma. Thinking about it in that sense. Okay. And so how, you know, an STI diagnosis to even like porn exposure, like something that seems so harmless, or just because it's not like the physical act directly involving another person. I'm wondering what a support group would look like for people on the broad range of perspectives of experiences. I'm sorry, not perspectives of sexual trauma, being in a room or Zoom with a therapist to talk through whatever healing is going to look like for them.
Yeah, that's an interesting spin on it. I guess in some ways I hadn't even thought about it in that way. You know, I mean, it is a traumatic experience tied to sex. So it definitely, you know, putting that together, it does make sense in my book, and it's worth exploring for sure. I hadn't even thought about it that way, to be honest with you.
Yeah, so I guess this is a good point to announce this. You are my last scheduled podcast interview. I believe you will be episode 199, and episode 200 is going to be how to get over herpes stigma. I'll probably just hit record and just talk for an astronomically long amount of time and just provide some consistent takeaways from the podcast, and then that is going to be it for the herpes stuff. On the podcast, I want to move forward by acting in the way that I've encouraged people to behave, you know, when they come here. I want people to come here, get what they need, and then leave and go on about their lives. So it's important for me now to practice what I preach. 200 numerical podcast episodes about herpes and STIs exclusively is plenty. And now that we've got therapy in place, if people want to do something, these are all of the selling points for them to be able to do something. Episode 201, I plan on bringing on Aaron Davidson, who wrote a book called Break Through the Breakup. And I want to expand my conversations more into that area because just like you said, you went into therapy for herpes, right? This was herpes therapy, and you left talking about boundaries. You left talking about self-care. I want to more so speak to people who are navigating life experiences and exploring their healing processes so that people can share, let's say something positive from positive people who've gone through their healing process. So episode 201 should be like the official rebrand. I meet with my board of directors here soon to talk about that because honestly, I want to be able to get people therapy, period. It's not the herpes, and after having heard from you about how much of a luxury therapy is, like that was just further validation that this is the right direction to go into. I also think that more people will be able to get behind an organization that is providing therapy to people who've experienced a sexual trauma. Now, that's going to be a lot more paperwork and a lot more education required on my end, but honestly, I'm here for it. And again, just hearing it from you, hearing it from a lot of my recent podcast guests, a lot of recent people who found the podcast, it feels like this is the right direction to go into. Because, like I said, there's 200 plus podcast interviews that serve as support resources from people's experience with herpes. Season 2, episode 201, Something Positive from Positive People, is going to elaborate more on these conversations around boundaries, navigating abusive relationships, recovering from them, being able to break through the breakup, even, and even like to get back out and start dating again. I found myself having a lot of conversations that were really, really good, and somehow I have to remind myself, I have to bring this back to herpes somehow. And honestly, I'm over it because it's not about herpes anymore. Now it's about these behavior patterns. It's about beliefs. It's about it's about behaviors and beliefs, human behavior.
Definitely,
that's where we're headed here. And like I said, you're the last one.
Ooh, man, I saved the best for last, right?
Right.
Well, congratulations on having that many episodes out there with just all these resources for people, and they're still out there, right? So these people can go back and listen to that, and then you're stepping forward with a new, set of information for people. And I would agree with you. I mean, herpes is just a small piece of the puzzle. It feels really big for a long time. It definitely feels really big, but we're so much more than that, right? There's so much more to the puzzle. I mean, it is boundaries and being able to even acknowledge what your needs are, let alone vocalize them, is a big piece of that in disclosure, right? Like, the herpes is just a little part of that. It amplifies things, I think, is what it is. What it does. I mean, that's the best way I can describe it in my life. It has amplified things. And kind of without it, I'm not sure I would have found these areas that needed some work, but definitely it's less about the herpes and more about the belief structures around it, like how you feel about sex, how you feel about STIs, how you feel about, so much more to it.
Mm-hmm. And I also, I woke up yesterday. It was yesterday morning. I woke up and I was like, I think I'm officially over this being about herpes. Like, I get called a herpes advocate, and it's like, if that's what you see me as, then there's a bigger problem. There's herpes education advocacy. There's STI education advocacy. But this is truly about overall health. This is about sexual health. It's about emotional well-being. It's about mental health. It's about taking care of your physical health and also taking care of your environment. Being able to have the people in your space, the energy that you're allowing in and what you're putting out and what you're investing in. It's about all of that. And even just with this conversation, as it started, 90% of the conversations with people were about herpes and 10% were about the individual's experience. So in a way, when I started out, I was perpetuating herpes stigma. And this was something that I just couldn't have known until, way later after talking to so many people and really getting to understand that we're all human. And 90% of this should be about being human, and 10% of it should be about herpes, because that's where the power shift should be
Definitely.
when we're diagnosed. Like, we should be
Yeah.
reminded, hey, nothing about you's changed. You're just going to have a lot of your attention and focus on this now. And that's just a normal part of the process. But here are some resources that can help you, take away some of that energy that you're giving to herpes. It's really
Yeah.
only an issue when physical symptoms present themselves and when you need to disclose to someone. That's it.
Right.
So
That's
when
it.
we're able to get to the point about that, we'll see that any more attention given to that is actually something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like a lot of the stigma, like I have my own like internalized stigma, right? Like that was part of what I worked through in this therapy is like, it's my own, it has as much power as I give it, right? It's as big as I make it. And when I can look back on my life and all these hardships, all these struggles, all these crazy things that I've been through, and like this is what I'm hung up on, like that was kind of a revelation for me. It was just like, girl.
Yeah. I got a couple of messages today on Instagram and one of these was bad. I don't like how the interaction went. And I'm not going to like share what the person said verbatim because this was a consent issue. So I often post on Instagram. I'll do like Ask Me Anythings where I ask people a question and I ask for responses either in the text box or if it's too long, send it to me via DM. And so, as always, like I go through and I screenshot, remove people's identifiers, and I'll just share it to the story. And I had someone do that in response to one of them, and I made it into a post. It was really long, so I messaged her back, and I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna read this and respond like later because it was like 8 a.m. I just woke up or whatever it was."
Mm-hmm.
And so I go ahead and like I share it, I make it into a post, and I put it up there. And a couple of days go by, and she sends me a message like blasting me about consent and not having asked her to if I could share it. And I was like, and then was upset that I didn't respond to her like I said I would. I read it, and there wasn't a question, so it looked like she was just sharing. So
Yeah.
I was very confused by this, and this was the first time that anyone has really had any issue with that. And for me to have this makes me more so conscious of the conversations that need to be had outside of herpes, given it's about consent. And so I just asked her questions. She just really wanted to be combative for some reason, so I didn't bother entertaining it. In the event that she tries to attack me or some shit, like I've saved the screenshots in the folder because I even asked her, I was like, well, do I have your consent to present this to my board of directors? I didn't have to ask that because she reached out to an extension of the organization. My board of directors are the organization, but I didn't want to get into that with her. I think she was fairly young and just perhaps like angry that I didn't reply to her, but there wasn't a question. And I do that fairly often. Like if you ask me something, I'll give you an answer. But if you're sharing in response to something, that's it. So that was one thing. And then the other thing, I got like a sincere validation that it is in fact time to move on because of the story that someone shared with me about how she is married to the guy that gave her herpes. And I was like, "Tell me more." So
it's not all bad. We always hear the horror stories, I mean, that's like watching the news, right? Like you only hear the horror stories, and when you watch that, and then you expect the worst, that's kind of
And it's just outside of our perspective. So many more people who have herpes are more so in that headspace than negative. One survey I did in 2019 was exclusively for people who listened to Something Positive for Positive People. When I did that, 98% of people were depressed. About half of the people had suicide ideation. 25% of people like self-harmed, and that includes like cutting or excessive drinking. And 6% of people had attempted suicide. That was in 2019. and only for the podcast. So the statistics now are that there were 3% of people attempted suicide, but 36% of people had thought about it. It was something like 36%. The statistics are on the website. But what that tells me, because this survey was also much more broad, it wasn't exclusive to podcast listeners. The people who are actively seeking support are in a much worse place than the people who just like, oh, hey, I listened to this podcast and this guy's looking for people with herpes to take the survey. Can you take the survey? Those are the kinds of people on the receiving end of that message who are probably just like, oh, it's not a big deal. When I get outbreaks, I take the medicine. And when I have to disclose, I disclose. It's as simple as that. And those are the people who are the leaders of not perpetuating stigma, because it's very objective. It's just very like, matter of fact, this is what it is. This is how I handle it. And I want to get more people to that place. I want for people to listen to this podcast, hear those stories, and be able to move on. But my whole point about bringing up the lady who married the guy who gave her herpes is that she said that it was more about the connection. Like, she liked him. And when she talked about her priorities were the relationship. Is this someone that I see myself with long term? Like, the herpes is just going to be there. You may or may not be with somebody else later who has herpes, right? So why is that such a priority to us?
Yeah, I know. Why does it take up so much space in our heads about and tie into our self-worth? I mean, do we just let that happen, like, because of the thoughts we allow? I mean, I don't know, know. But I would agree, like, it really is. That's how you overcome the stigma, is really just not letting it be the 90%, right? Letting it be that 10% where it's just this thing. Yeah. And if this person can't get past that and see me, then they're not for me. Yeah. Exactly. Right? I mean, it's obviously easier said than done because no one likes rejection, but like, there's a lot more to that. Yeah. Right? Like, being able to be okay with that. So.
And that's something that's come up while you were in group therapy. For me, individual therapy, I interviewed my therapist. His episode will be on shortly. Actually, in 2 weeks. His episode will be up in 2 weeks. And for me, in individual therapy, I recognized what my issue was with rejection. And you were in groups, so you weren't able to get super deep into that. But when you recognize like where this comes from, it's really just a matter of self-rejection. Fear of rejection is essentially self-rejection. You are rejecting yourself before you give yourself an opportunity to even be accepted by someone else. And when you start to see it that way, you can't unsee it. Like, I don't reject myself anymore. I recognize when I'm slow to do something or hesitant, and I have to give myself this emotional or mental push. I have to reach out for support and ask someone to like help me with figuring this out. And that's it. But like, I now recognizing that, like, you can't stop me. Like, seeing where that came from, my intent for everyone is to see where their self-limitations are, their self-imposed limitations are, so that you can continue to move fluid. And when there's an external force that's really inhibiting your progression, then you deal with that. But we shouldn't get in our own ways. We shouldn't contribute to whatever barriers are in place that keep us from succeeding.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, as part of my realization and on my journey recently has just been how much I've held myself back. I mean, it's been me. It hasn't been obviously there's been a lot of like life circumstances that are out of my control, but at the end of the day, like, when it comes to me finding a relationship, being single, not being single, like, I have been the one that's held myself back. And like this repeated string of unavailable people, like, I had to realize and take a look at my own unavailability, my own fears attached to intimacy, I have my own unavailability as well, even if I am open to the idea of things. Like, when it comes down to it, it's on me.
Yeah, that's it. This is really this is validating for me. Just this conversation, this exchange, this dialogue, because even for me, I think that I've held myself back in relation to something positive for positive people. And in holding myself back, I'm holding back this organization. In holding back this organization, I'm holding back this podcast. I'm holding back the people who listen to this podcast. So it's important that the transition be one that shows people that at a certain point in your life, you got to be willing to make that transition and welcome in whatever it is that's to come. No matter how scary it may seem, no matter how unpredictable or how unstable or how insecure it may make you,
uncomfortable.
If you're breathing, you can handle it. It's as simple as that.
Absolutely. And like you said, once you see it that way, there's no turning back. That's a leaf that has been turned. And I mean, I've said it a lot recently where it's like, I don't really know what this looks like on the other side, but I just know I'm not doing that anymore. Like, I'm not going to be that person that does that and says that and presents himself this way. I don't necessarily know how to embody being a person that is the opposite of that, but I'm not going back there.
Mm-hmm. In my therapy, we talked about this lower caps self and a all cap self, and that default behavioral pattern is lowercase self, and the person who can observe that behavior is taking place or about to take place is the caps lock self, because you're operating from a place of choice so that you can do something different and to break that pattern. So that's the kind of stuff that we can get out of this therapy thing. And like I said, it shouldn't be a luxury, and that's what something positive for positive people is here for, so that it doesn't have to be a luxury. So I'm feeling real good about changing the podcast name to Something Positive from Positive People for season 2, and then continuing to have something positive for positive people as the organization, being able to get people who've had a sexual trauma into therapy. Because when we can get to the point of healing our sexual shame, I think that we're able to be more creative, because that sexual energy is creative energy. And when we're in the process of healing that, like, we're able to go off and heal others. And it's through sex that we can begin to exercise boundaries, identify abuse, manage our relationships better, and just overall walk out in our healing process, making that be what's contagious. Our healing should be contagious. And that's what it should be.
Going to heal the world, Courtney.
I mean, hey,
out there healing people in this way and providing those services. I mean, there just aren't words for how meaningful it is to people like me, and I'm sure there's a lot of other people. It may not be for everyone, but it's just hugely meaningful. And you're so right. Healing that aspect. That aspect is really the practice of all these things, right? And when you have like some downfall, some, I don't want to say weaknesses, but areas that need improvement or practice, it really is either have it or you don't in that moment, Yeah.
So that's where I'm at now. I mean, like I said, you're the last interview, and my focus and attention now has been on reaching out to university clinics and trying to get the survey results that came into as many schools as possible, so that when kids in college are diagnosed, they have somewhere to go. I think that these are the people more likely to find and listen to a podcast. So podcast listens go up, the resource circulates within that community, and as these people become adults and graduate from college and go into their work fields and go out into the world of dating, we've got a much more sex positive up and coming generation at the age of, unfortunately, if, let's say they're diagnosed by 20, it'll take a few years maybe for them to get through it. But my hope is that they're given this resource right away so that they can choose how they want to navigate it moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it would be great to get this information in the hands of healthcare providers for them to see the discrepancies that are out there. I mean, I don't know that they are aware. I mean, sexual stigma, STI stigma, like, they're not immune to that just because they're a healthcare provider. I mean, I think I saw somewhere in one of the online resources that healthcare providers get like a half-a-day training on it. Like, it's just not something... And really, it's so big to the people that it affects. It really is a shortcoming of the medical field. And if we could get that information into them and their staff, I mean, I can't tell you how many times, well, I've talking about that many times, but there have been times I've gone to the doctor for, issues related, and like the looks you get from the MAs, like just the judgment, it discourages you from going, so
Yeah.
that definitely.
And also, like, the way that people deliver a diagnosis is STD prevention. They don't have these post-diagnosis support resources on hand. I don't know if they're not recognized or if it's just not in line with the organization's or institution's values. But
Right.
what I'm seeing is that an integration of these post-diagnosis support resources with STD prevention efforts is going to give people the empowerment, the confidence, the resources, and tools that they need in order to go off and disclose to people. How often it is that someone receives their diagnosis from a medical professional, the way that they receive it often impacts not only how they disclose to a next partner, but if they disclose to a next partner. How many people are being told you don't have to disclose, just wear condoms, as long as you're not having an outbreak, you're fine. That's what's perpetuating not only STI stigma, but it's also increasing the chances of people unknowingly exposing themselves to herpes when it doesn't have to be. If it's more common that people are able to go off and have a conversation with their partners about their sexual health and their positive diagnosis, then that in itself is going to be something that makes people who don't have herpes a lot more comfortable talking about it. I look at it just like with the LGBT community. The more allies there are, I don't have to be someone who has sex with men in order to, when I hear a gay joke or when I hear, something that is harmful to someone who is a man who does have sex with men, like I can speak out against that. It's the same thing with our STI status. If people around me know that I have herpes, when someone tells them they have it, like they can be like, oh, well, my friend Courtney does this thing. How many more people, are just kind of like hiding in fear of something happening that is so not likely to happen, which is just like, I don't know, being outed. And even if you're outed, what's going to happen? Is that person going to not sleep with you and you had no intention of sleeping with them in the first place? Or is that person going to also have herpes and be like, hey, let's do this. Like, I got it too. What's going on?
Right. Yeah, or even like, the people walking around out here with their cold sores feeling like, well, I don't have herpes though. Like, really?
Yeah.
That's probably how someone like me got it, to be honest with you, Like not realizing that transmission can take place too. It's sad. Yeah. Sad how much misinformation and miseducation is out there.
I know that you mentioned you'll miss everybody from the group therapy. So on Facebook, I've just started saying this. There's a Something Positive for Positive People podcast community. I think that's where I'm going to direct people who are done with the therapy services if they want to be a part of that community and stay in touch with people. That's there. I was going to delete it because I'm the only person that posts in it. It's got like 70 people in it. I'll post and be like, hey, everyone, just checking in. How are you? Or what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, count me in. Count me in. I love it. I love the community. I love the camaraderie. And I mean, it's always good to just have someone to turn to when it is something that, the people in your life that may be supportive, but they still just don't get it, that you can talk to them about it,
Yeah. So
huge.
That's where I'm at. That's my plan. I guess, is there any words of encouragement that you have perhaps for someone who may be considering group therapy as a stepping stone or therapy period in relation to your experience?
Well, I think therapy is always worth it. It's never going to do any harm, right? It can only help you discover more about who you are and how you function. And everybody needs some therapy. We all live messy lives, and we all need some therapy and some perspective on things.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I got. Thank you so much, Malia, for being here.
Thank you.
And sharing your experience. And
I appreciate you so much.
This is fantastic. And thanks for, being here for the final interview of Something Positive for Positive People.
Turning a leaf, Courtney. It's all aligned with where I'm at, so I'm here for it.
Thank you. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
That concludes this episode of Something Positive for Positive People. Please like, rate, review, share, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast player and listening platform. I am on social media at H on my chest. And if you want to donate to the organization, please don't hesitate to do so. I can't believe my PlayStation's going crazy right now. Do you hear that? I
heard a little.
Yeah, I unplugged the refrigerator, and now there's just this.
I mean, Mercury retrograde is supposed to be over, but I can't tell you how many weird things I have going on just in the past couple of days. I'm like, what is happening?
Oh, my ex called me on the last day of retrograde.
Really?
Yes.
You're like, get out of here.
No, I wanted to talk to her because
okay, well that's good. Yeah.
We do this thing where when we block each other or we go without any contact, we bump into each other somehow or connect, and then it's all like rainbows and sunshine, and then we have sex, and then we date a bit, and then we're like, why did we even do this? I hate you. I remember why. And so, yeah, it's always just been nice to have the lines of communication open because there's this depressurization of that tension building. So we've been able to just communicate every 6 months to a year.
Yeah, just say hey.
Yeah, that's it.
Good. That's good.
Till next time, stay sex positive.